Today's lesson, we're going to factor trinomials using the master product rule. Before you use the master product rule, check to make sure you don't have a perfect trinomial square. A perfect trinomial square is very easy to factor. If the first term is a perfect square and the last term is a perfect square and then the middle term is double the product of those two, so 2ab, then you have a perfect trinomial square, and it factors real nicely to a binomial squared. For instance, this trinomial right here, the first term is 49x squared. Well, 49x squared is the square of 7x. And then the last term, 25, is the square of 5. If I double the product of these two, 7x times 5 is 35, double it, you get 70x. Then you have a perfect trinomial square, which factors to 7x plus 5. Quantity squared, you just bring these numbers down. Now this trinomial right here is not a perfect trinomial square because 8 is not a perfect square. So we're going to use the master product rule. The first step is to multiply a times c. So a is 8, c is negative 15. If you multiply those two together, you get negative 120. The second step is you want to find two factors of negative 120 whose sum is b, which is the middle term, the middle number right here of 2. So negative 120 is pretty easy because I could take 12 times negative 10. And I know those multiply together to give me negative 120, and they add together to give me 2. So 12 plus negative 10 equals 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these two numbers right here, and I'm going to rewrite this trinomial into a polynomial of 4 terms. So I'm going to take the first term, which is 8x squared, and then the 2x, instead of writing 2x as 2x, I'm going to write it as 12x minus 10x. I'm using these two numbers, and then use the negative 15. So now you know when you have 4 terms, you factor by grouping. So I'm going to look at the first 2 terms, and what do they have in common? They have a 4x. So I'm going to pull out a 4x from the first 2. I get 2x plus 3. Whenever you factor, check your work. So 4x times 2x is 8x squared. 4x times 3 is 12x. Now when you factor by grouping, this is the one time you're allowed to cheat. And by cheating, I mean I know the second grouping has to give me this 2x plus 3. I don't know where the 2x plus 5 came from. You want 2x plus 3. So now what do I multiply 2x by to get negative 10x? And this is going to be minus 5. So minus 5 times 2x is negative 10x, and negative 5 times 3 is negative 15. So this factors to 2x plus 3 times 4x minus 5. Now on this problem, it was pretty easy to do because negative 120, it was pretty easy to see that the two factors of negative 120 that added together to give you 2 were 12 and negative 10. Well, let's look at one that's not so clear. Oh my goodness, look at that. Holy cow. What do I do? Well, the first step on this one is to factor out any greatest common factors. And each of these numbers is divisible by 6. And each of these terms has x cubed in it. So I can rewrite this by factoring out a 6x cubed from each of the 3 terms. That leaves me with 30x squared. And then the middle term is 17x. And the last term is 35. And go through and check all these. Take 6x cubed times 30x squared. That gives you 180x to the 5th. 6x cubed times 17x is 102x to the 4th. And 6x cubed times minus 35 gives you negative 210x cubed. Now I'm going to apply the master product rule. I'm going to take a times c. So I'm going to take 30 times negative 35. And I get this little teeny number. Oh my goodness. Not as easy as negative 120, is it? So you got negative 1050. So I want two factors that multiply together to give me negative 1050, but add together to give me 17. So where do you start? Well, use your calculator and start dividing numbers into this and see if you can figure out which ones works. It's not an easy process, but you're not going to start with small numbers. I'm not going to start with 2 and see how many times 2 goes into this. I'm going to start with larger numbers, and so I'll start with 20. So if I take 20 and divide it into 1050, that goes in 52.5 times. That's not going to work. If I multiply these two together, I'll get negative 1050, but when I add these together, I'm not going to get positive 17. Now, one thing to look at is what signs would I have here? The middle term is positive, so you want the bigger number here to be positive. So if I was actually doing this, this would be the negative one. But this doesn't work. So let's try negative 25. How many times does 25 go into 1050? And 25 goes into 1050 42 times. Hey, that's looking good. Again, since this is positive, you want the bigger number positive, so I'm going to make this negative. So negative 25 times 42 equals negative 1050, and 25 plus 42 equals 17. There we go. So these are the two numbers I want to use, negative 25 and 42. So I'm going to rewrite this, and I'm going to take 30x squared, and instead of putting 17x, I'm going to use these two numbers. I'm going to use minus 25x plus 42x. Those two numbers add up to 17x, and then I got minus 35. Now you're going to factor by grouping. So you look at the first two. What do they have in common? 5 goes into both, and x. So I'm going to take out a 5x from 30x, and that's 6x. And I'm going to take a 5x out of there, leaving with 5. And again, you double check. 5x times 6x is 30x squared. 5x times minus 5 is minus 25x. Now you cheat. This has to be 6x minus 5. If you're going to factor by grouping, it has to be that. So what do I multiply 6x to get 42x? This has got to be plus 7. Does that work? 7 times 6x is 42x. 7 times minus 5 is 35. It works. So then 6x minus 5. And then you got 5x plus 7. Am I done? No. Yeah, I am. Just got to bring this down. Don't forget that greatest common factor that you factored out. And there you go. It's factored using the master product rule.